Thank you everyone for coming. I am a co-investigator of the Science of Philanthropy initiative, which is an initiative that is aimed at using field experiments and laboratory experiments and the lens of economic theory to learn more about people's intrinsic motivation to contribute to the public good, to donate organs, and any other kind of social kind of behaviors that we see. And we are actually an initiative that's partly at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and partly at the University of Chicago. But the initiative does 2 webinars a year, which happen to be at UW-Madison, so we're very lucky to have Judd Kessler here today. And Judd is a good friend of mine who is at Wharton. He's an assistant professor in business economics and public policy. And the work he's presenting today is on organ donation. It's joint work with Al Roth, who recently won the Nobel Prize. So we're very glad to have him. We have all of you guys here from economics, consumer science, agricultural economics, Loophole, possibly IRP, and then we have some people joining in the webinar, or some other experimental economists and other social researchers from around the US and maybe the world. We don't know, some of them have logged in anonymously. They will also be posting questions, and Amanda might be asking those questions. And we'll try to hold those questions till the end, but if there's a lot of discussion, maybe we can open the questions for them too. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming. Particularly so close to the start of spring break. I'm very happy to be here. I will encourage all of you to ask questions at any point, as is the case with experiments. When I tell you what the design is, you really want to know you want to understand it so that you can understand what the results are. So if there's anything you're unsure about, please let me know. This is the first time that I'm presenting some of the work that's in this talk. It's certainly the first time I'm presenting all of my work with Al thus far together at once. It's also the first time I've been so heavily recorded. So hopefully those together will make for an exciting hour or so. Okay, so this is 3 papers on organ donor registration. What I'm going to do in the talk is first I'm just going to give you a background why we're interested in organ donation, why I'm particularly interested in organ donor registration, which is what the studies are going to be about. And then I'll talk in turn about 3 papers. First one that Al and I have, it was published in the AER last year, Organ Allocation Policy and the Decision to Donate. This is a laboratory study, and I'll describe it in detail. And we have a follow-up that's also a laboratory study that sort of goes in depth into organ allocation policy and tries to understand how specific designs of the policy, particularly where the policies that are being implemented in the real world, some of their features, how those are going to affect behavior and people's willingness to register. And then third paper, and this is one that I've sort of just finished and I haven't presented before, so I'll be very interested to hear questions, is a follow-up study where we actually look at real people in Massachusetts making real decisions about joining the real organ donor registry. So to decide if they make a choice in our experiment to become an organ donor, when they leave the lab, they are an organ donor, and God forbid something should happen to them, they would be listed on the registry, and those wishes would be implemented. So we're very excited about having been able to do that, and sort of what we think we've learned from that study as well. So a little bit of background on organ donation. So why is this a topic that we care about? Well, it's a big issue in health. There are a lot of people waiting for an organ. Many of these people have been waiting for a long time and need an organ to, in some cases, to live, but certainly to improve their quality of life and quality of health. The waiting list right now, I checked this morning, it was 9 more people than it was when I checked last night. It's above 117,000 people who are on at least one waiting list for an organ in the US. There are a lot of people who get added to the list each year. So there's more recent data than 2001, but I'm about to show you more data from, 2011 rather, but I'm about to show you more data from 2011. I want it to be comparable. Right? So just over 50,000 people were added to one of these organ donor waiting lists in 2011. And in 2011, there were 14,000 people who donated organs. A good number of them were living donors. So a living donor is somebody who, while alive, says, I would like to donate an organ, almost always one kidney. So you have you have two kidneys, and each kidney they replicate each other. And so you can remove a kidney from yourself and give it to somebody who needs a kidney, and you can still operate and live a healthy life. And then if your kidney works for them, they can as well. So most of the people, all but a few hundred, give a kidney. It is also possible to give half a liver, and your liver sort of regenerates, and the liver that you give may also regenerate. Yeah?
You may not want to answer this, but, and this is based on a colleague, some people are on the waiting list, but then when they learn what life would be like with a transplant, they decide not to go ahead with it. So this is a list, but it may in fact be.
Yeah, so there is. So no, it's a great point. There are many reasons that people. So this list, they also report, maybe not daily, but the active candidates. It's a different class, and that's I think it's between about 75 or 80,000 people who are considered active. There's lots of reasons that you might be waiting and not be active. Maybe your health has taken a turn for the worse, and so until they get you sort of better, you're going to remain inactive. It could be that you put your name on the list, but you are fine on dialysis right now, and you wouldn't want to do a organ transplant unless it's like a really perfect one for you, and maybe you're on the waiting list, but you're really hoping that you're going to find a living donor, because living donors, that the organ's being taken out immediately, put into you, as opposed to deceased donor organs. I'm going to talk about the differences in a second. Those might have waiting time and might have the organ deteriorate in some way while you're waiting. But yeah, so that is an issue. But this slide is just to motivate why we think it's important. Right, 80,000 people actively waiting for an organ. Still a large number and a growing number. So 50,000 people added in 2011. Of the 14,000 donors, many are these living donors giving a kidney. Then there's also deceased donors. The deceased donors are people who, upon death, their organs get recovered and given to people who are on these waiting lists. So there are more deceased donors than living donors. There are more transplants than donors because deceased donors can give multiple organs. And so a deceased donor doesn't need either of his or her kidneys, so both of them can go to people who are waiting, as can liver, intestines, lung, heart. A lot of different organs can go to people who need them, and as can non-life-saving, but still very life-improving tissues and other secondary organs. So of the transplants, the 28,000, 6,000 come from living donors, and 22,000 transplants comes from these 8,000 deceased donors. So more deceased donors than living donors, and 80% of the transplants are coming from deceased donors. And you'll notice that there's a lot more people being added to these lists than there are transplantable organs. The list is growing every year. Unfortunately, it does not grow by the difference because people come off the list because they die or because they become too sick to transplant. All right, so this is an issue. This is growing. This is just for kidneys. This is the by year, a bunch of relevant number of deceased donors, transplants, living donors. But then I have all the wait list patients. And as you can see, even in the last 10 years, it's gone from 50,000 to 86,000 people who are on one of these waiting lists for kidney. So I'm doing this work with Al, as Anya mentioned. He just won the Nobel Prize, in part for a lot of things. One of the things that he does is he does a bunch of work on living donors. So here's him. He's over here in yellow scrubs, overseeing a kidney transplant. I think the yellow scrubs is so that nobody hands him anything. They know he's not actually. But what his work is about is, let's flash away from the what might be gruesome. His work is about incompatible patient-donor pairs who want to, somebody wants to give a kidney to their partner, but is incompatible for some biological reason. Right? There's a lot of those cases, and my understanding is that if somebody bears your child, something about that process makes it more difficult for you to give a kidney to them because their body has learned to treat your things that come from your body is different from things that are in their body. And so there's a lot of reasons why you might have people who want to donate kidneys or another organ to someone but not be able to. And so what Al's work does, one of the things that he looks at is ways to solve this problem. So I can give a kidney to your partner, and you can give a kidney to my partner, and we both, our partners both get kidneys, which is what we wanted, and we've been able to achieve that with kidneys that are compatible. And so that's called kidney exchange, and that's opened up a lot of sort of interesting work, both on these bilateral exchanges and also on chains of kidney donations. So you may have seen this. This gets covered in the New York Times and other sources where somebody gives a undirected donation, so it says, I'm going to donate a kidney, and that can set off this chain reaction where people who are waiting for one of these exchanges can say, well, if you get a kidney from my partner, I'll give a kidney to the next person, and then their partner has promised to give a kidney to another person, and so on. So these chains can grow to be 60 transplants and even larger. So there's a lot of that work going on, and that work's important and it's progressing, but that's still, it's growing, but there's only so much that can do. So they've done over 2,400 transplants with kidney exchanges and with these chains, but that's, as you saw the numbers, that's small over the last few years compared to the size of the list. So what we're looking at in this research, slide of research and the papers I'm going to talk to you about today, is thinking about deceased donors. And how can we increase the number of transplantable organs from deceased donors and try to understand the process by which people decide to become donors and what can influence that. So as I said already, there's more deceased donors than living donors. Most of the transplants are coming from deceased donors, so each deceased donor generates a number of transplants. And when you look at people's willingness to register as a deceased donor, the rate is, in the US, 43% nationally of people who are eligible, who are 18 years or older. All right, and this is far from 100%. So one might think there's a lot of opportunity to encourage the people who are not registered to become registered. So what does it mean to be registered as a donor? So how do people become deceased donors? Sounds a little gruesome. So I really mean, how do they, yeah, I guess I do mean this. So they die in a way that allows their organs to be transplanted. So head injuries are a way that generates a lot of deceased donors because all your organs are fine, but your brain is no longer active. Those are going to be your heart's pumping blood to your organs. You might be otherwise in good shape, so that's going to make for a good candidate for deceased donation. How does somebody who's in that position, how do their organs get transplanted? Well, there's sort of two ways that they can become a deceased donor in that position. One is if they previously opted in to registered as a donor, say at their state DMV. So if you've gotten a driver's license at any point or a learner's permit, the most DMVs in the country have some way to allow you to designate that you would like to be an organ donor if you're ever in this unfortunate situation. And so when we say the 43% of people are donors, we are looking at these state registries and we're asking what percent of people who are eligible say yes. The other way, and often both of these are required, it's not just one, but it's becoming the case more and more that this registering at the Department of Motor Vehicles is becoming binding, and so this is not necessary. But certainly for the people who do not say yes here, the other way to become a deceased organ donor is that your next of kin say, yes, I would like these organs to be donated. When it's in a situation where your organs might be recovered and given to other people. So these are the two ways, and we're going to think a lot about this one in the first two studies, and then we're going to start to think about how though in the third study, the way in which you ask this question, the way in which you ask people to register, might affect this decision by next of kin who might be put in a position to answer on your behalf. So these are the sort of two ways that we think about it. And I should say, of the 43% are registered, we don't have great data on this nationally, but in Massachusetts, where we have talked to people, they say that about half of the people who are not registered donors, the next of kin allow the organs to be recovered. So it's not as bad as 43%, but it's not 100%. And they also say that of the 43% who are registered, those almost always go through. So the next of kin rarely say, or never say, no, I don't want to honor this request. All right, so when thinking about how to increase the rates of organ donor registration, Al and I were inspired by some policies that were in place or being put in place in other countries. And one of the things that had been done is that there had been attempts to, and policies that assigned organs that came in that were recovered differently to try to encourage registration. So let me explain what I mean. We're looking at organ allocation. So this is when organs are recovered, how are they allocated to people? In the US, this is done by waiting lists within a region and by organ. And so, different organs have different rules about the way the waiting lists are operated, and different things sort of matter differently for different organs. So for example, kidneys, people can live for many years on dialysis. And so one of the things that gets very heavily weighted in a kidney waiting list is how long you've been waiting around for a kidney. So the longer you've been waiting, the more likely you are to get one. Whereas for liver, there is no dialysis. So if you need a liver and you don't get one quickly, you're going to die. And so they much more heavily prioritize your health status at the moment where the liver becomes available. Right. So, but the general sort of policy in the U.S. is that we're going to take into account your health and how long you've been waiting, and those are going to be the major, and whether this organ is going to be compatible, and those are going to be the things that we look at. But other countries, and when we started, it was just Singapore, but Israel has recently implemented a policy like this. They use organ allocation to encourage people to register as donors. And the way that they do that is they provide priority on these waiting lists to people who had previously agreed to be donors. Right? So you don't know when you're 18 whether you're going to be in a position to donate your organs, or you're going to be in a position where you might need them. And so these policies say to you then, if you decide now that you'll be a donor, in the event that is possible, then if you ever need an organ, we'll make sure you get priority over somebody who, in your position, said, no, I don't want to participate. So the way, when we put this into econ terms, I think about the organ donor registry as a public good. You agree to be a donor, and that increases the sort of ex ante pool of potential organs that might be transplanted or available for transplant. And what these policies do is they make it feel more like a club good. So you're going to be able to access this public good, this potential pool of organs more readily or more easily if you contributed to that public good by agreeing to be a donor. All right, so these policies seem interesting. They seem like they might work. Right, what do we want to do? We might want to analyze the policy changes and look to see how the changes in policy affect people's willingness to register. So this is hard to do in Singapore. There's a lot of differences between Singapore and the US. They have an opt-out system. We have opt-in, and the data isn't readily available. But this is in progress for the Israeli change that was fully implemented in April 2012. Alternatively, you might want to do a field experiment. This is a complex setting. There's a lot of visceral, emotional components to the decision to register as a donor. But the problem with that is that this is not something that you can easily tool around with. Organ donation and organ donor allocation is heavily regulated. So here's a segment out of the National Organ Transplant Act called NOTA, and sort of the penalties associated with doing anything fishy surrounding organ donation include $50,000 and about 5 years in prison, which I often analogize to punishment associated with going to graduate school. But this is, so this is not something that you want to mess with. We didn't want to mess with it. So what we're going to do as a first pass is we're going to look at laboratory experiments, and we're going to try to use laboratory experiments to understand the key components of these kinds of policy interventions, and try to understand exactly if this were to work, what would be driving the effect of these policies. So what are we going to do? We're going to think about the nature of the incentives rather than the visceral components, and we're going to, when we think about extrapolating, we're going to have to be cautious, right? So I'm going to show you big treatment effects, and I've been asked in interviews, you start out with rates of donation that are approximately 40%, and you see that they jump up with priority, by two or 2.5 times what they are before. Is that what we should expect if we were to implement the policy in the U.S.? No, we're not going to look at numbers from the lab experiment and say that those are going to be, what happens if we were to implement this policy in the field. It's very different settings, so we're going to be very cautious. But the lab is a natural starting place because of the difficulty associated with field experiments and with the data from the policy changes, which will come, but will take a long time to arrive. All right, so that was the background. On to the first experiment. So the first paper, organ allocation policy and the decision to donate, it's a laboratory experiment. And it's a laboratory experiment that is described in a neutral way to the subjects, but we have a very specific model in mind. It's the decision to register as an organ donor. And so we have in our mind the analog for the experimental term, and I will go through both of them for you. So if you're thinking as a subject, you're thinking about what's in quotes, and if you're thinking about us analyzing it, we're thinking about what's in parentheses. All right, so subjects start each round of this game with an A unit and 2 B units. And so the A unit is their brain, and the B units are their kidneys. And each round, the subject is going to be alive for a number of periods. All right, so what being alive means is that that their A unit is still active, and their B units are in good enough shape that they're functioning. So I'll describe that in detail in a second. When they're alive for a number of periods, and each period that they're alive, they earn a dollar. A dollar gets added to their to the round earnings. They earn the dollar. I should say they don't just have to be alive. They have to have an active A unit and at least one active B unit. So they earn money when they're alive and healthy. They might fall out of being healthy in one of two ways. Each period of every round is like a life. Each period, the A unit has a 10% chance of failing, and the B units have a 20% chance of failing. And like kidneys, the B units are going to either both be working fine or both be failing simultaneously. So this is the sort of the initial setup. What happens when their A units or their B units fail? If the A unit fails, the round ends. Right, so this is death. If a B unit fails, you have 5 periods to receive a B unit from somebody else. And so we think about this as being on dialysis. So you're alive, but you're not earning money because you're not healthy. Again, money in these experiments is going to sort of be proxying for everything. It's going to be proxying for being healthy is a stream of income. Being unhealthy here, you're not earning that income, but while you're on dialysis, you have the opportunity to receive a B unit from somebody else, start earning money again. If you don't receive the B unit within 5 periods, then the round ends for the person. That's another way that they can die. So how does somebody with failed B units start earning money again? Well, a subject with failed B units can receive a B unit from another player if another player's A unit failed while their B units were still active. And the player had to have agreed to be an organ donor at the start of the round, the beginning of their life. Right, so we wanted, as I said, money's going to proxy for a lot of things. We are still learning what the costs are with registering to be an organ donor and becoming an organ donor. So usually economists think you have a utility function, and if you were to ask an economist at what point would you stop having a flow of utility, you'd say probably at death. You no longer have utility flow. So sort of one way of thinking about the cost is that, oh, there's no cost to you. You're not using your kidneys anymore. We're gonna remove them after you die, and that's going to be costless. But clearly that's not the case, because there are many people who are not organ donors. And so we think that there is some cost associated with registering. We're just not sure what it is. In the lab, we don't have to make a stand on what it is. We can just assign it in monetary terms, because everything else in the study is abstract. So we assign costs of donation to be 40 cents or 80 cents. And this has to be paid regardless of whether you end up being a donor or not. Right? So the idea is, okay, if you're registered as a donor, that's incurring the costs is associated with registering, because God forbid something happens and you become a donor, right? You're not experiencing that. That happens after you die. So the cost has to come at some earlier stage. So to be registered as a donor, you're paying the cost. And then if your A unit fails and your B units are still healthy, they can be transplanted to other people. Any questions so far? This is sort of the building the design, but just want to, no questions online?
No questions online.
So annual. So every period you get $1. So this is relatively small. I mean, it's sizable versus $1, but they're in each round they're earning a number of dollars. So in expectation, they're earning around $4. So this is sort of a fraction of that. And we can look and see. I mean, I won't present a lot of results on this, but you can. There is a couple of percentage point difference in the willingness to register as a donor depending on cost. So the cost clearly seems to matter. So what are subjects going to do? They're going to play 31 rounds, 31 lives, in a fixed group of 12 subjects. And again, each round they're going to have this sort of series of periods where they're earning dollars, and they might end up needing a kidney and so on. All right, so each group has 6 low-cost donors, 6 high-cost donors, and they're only informed of their own cost of donation. So we're assuming that this is going to become more of an issue in the second study, but here we're just sort of assuming you don't know what the distribution of costs are in society to become an organ donor, but you know how you feel about it and how costly it is for you to overcome that and register. Okay, and then one more thing. So when you see the graphs, you'll be able to look at round 31 if you're interested. After subjects don't know how many rounds they're playing, but after round 30, they're told the next round is the last round. So as I said, this is like a public good. So this is like a public good game, and we might be interested in what the last round behavior looks like. So subjects are going to play this game that I've just described, and the thing that we're going to care about, the only real decision point for them, is whether they register as a donor at the beginning of each round, because that's the only thing they control. The rest of it is just their health outcome, whether they need a kidney or in a position to donate kidneys. But that's out of their control. So they're going to make this decision in one of 4 treatments, and I'll show you the results from each treatment as I go. So the control treatment is a policy by which the B units that become available are allocated based on how long you've been waiting. Okay, so if you've been waiting for a B unit for 5 periods, you're gonna die in the next period. You're gonna get priority for a B unit, and you're gonna get a B unit first, and then anyone who's been waiting 4 periods will get the next B unit, and however many B units there are, we're just gonna assign them in order of who's been waiting the longest. If there's 1 B unit and 2 people have been waiting an equally long amount of time, we're gonna flip a coin and give it to one of them. So this is data, and you're gonna see this graph a number of times as I add in the different treatments. This is the share donating, the percentage of the people in this condition who donate, and this is the round, the number of, this is the lifetime. And again, each player makes a decision in each lifetime, so we're observing sort of the behavior over the life. Over these many lives. There is a break between round 15 and 16 because at round 15, some of these people in the control group continued in the control group, but most of them were split between other treatments, which I'm about to show you. But the break is to indicate that these are different subjects. People who are in other treatments in the first 15 rounds will get lumped into this group as well. But in the control condition, what do we see? We see that we started around, well, it's about 34%, but around 40%. And we see a steady decline over the first 15 periods. We also see a similar decline over the next 15 periods. And this is similar to what we see in other public goods games where contribution declines over time. Now, I should say the feedback that they're getting is pretty noisy. All they see is whether their A unit failed or whether their B unit failed, and then if their B unit failed, how long they waited until they got one. So there's it's a very noisy kind of game because you're not really sure if other people are donating or not, because you only find out positive or negative news in certain instances. So we're going to contrast this control treatment to other treatments where we're going to, the first one is the sort of the main one of interest. It's this priority rule. So we're going to assign B units in the spirit of the Singapore and Israeli legislation. The people who agreed to be donors at the start of the round are going to have priority on any B units that come in. So how do we actually implement this? If you have agreed to register as a donor, to be a donor, if your A unit fails, then you are just in a higher priority class than the non-registered donors. So any B units that become available go first to this priority class and go in the order that you've been waiting. So if you're a person with priority who's been waiting 5 periods, you're going to get the B unit first. But if you're a person with priority who just got on the waiting list, this is your first period waiting, you're going to get the B unit before the person who did not donate who's been waiting 5 periods. So you're going to get the B unit even though they're about to die. All right, so this is the sort of a very extreme form of priority, but this is now providing a real incentive for you to register as a donor. And so what happens to the donation rate? Well, it pops up for the first 15 rounds, and again, people from this treatment moving into the priority group, again, increasing and significantly above the control group. So, yeah?
Can I just ask a clarification?
Yeah,
question?
please.
The percentages of donation is computed based on individuals who are assigned to each condition.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like the first round, we have like 30-something participants, so a third of them sign up.
Yeah, so right, we have more than 30 participants, but yeah, there's many groups, many 12-person groups are in the control condition at this stage, and what percent of them in the first round decide to donate. Then in this round, they have all these health outcomes. Some of them need A unit, need B units, and have A unit failure, and that everybody dies, and we start again. And we say, all right, same group of 12, how many of you want to donate in this lifetime? And then they make that decision, and then they see their health outcome. Then at the end, everybody dies, right? Eventually you die because you have A unit failure, or you're the last person around, and you have B unit failure, and there's no one around to give you a B unit. So that's an easy stop to the game. And then we do it again. So this is sort of over time how you're responding to this treatment.
So you get the chance to make that decision at each round.
At the beginning of each lifetime.
Okay.
Yep.
So each round is the beginning of each lifetime.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. No, thank you. That's an important question. So big treatment effects. This is what I was referring to when I said I got surveyed. So we're around here. Are you saying we're going to be around here if we? Or when I got interviewed, we're going to be around here when if we institute this policy. It's like, no, there's a big effect, and we're going to use the lab to try to understand where the effect is coming from. All right, so that's the inspiration for the next 2 treatments. We want to there's a lot of things that happen when you do a priority system. Right? What are the things that happen? Well, one, you disproportionately benefit people who also become donors. So this is something that might motivate you. You might decide, I really like when I help people who are also helpful, and in a priority rule, you have that effect. So your B units are more likely to go to people who also paid the cost to donate. The other thing is, sort of the flip side of that, is that the people who don't donate are earning less. So you might like that. You might like the fact that, this really sticks it to the people who couldn't bring themselves to donate. And you might also think that the way in which the organs are allocated, there's something special about that, and that really the fact that it is this priority system and the B units are going to certain people, independent of all the who gets helped and by how much, but that could be the thing that matters. So we're going to try to tease that apart in these next treatments to understand why priority works. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a rebate treatment. And so what does the rebate treatment do? It replicates the benefits of having priority in expectation, and it, at the end of the game, pays people out the expected benefit of priority if they were a donor. So I'll explain this. So what I did was I simulated 10 million lifetimes and said, what's the cash benefit and expectation of having priority versus not having priority in this game? And what's important is you have to do this for each number of other people in your group who are donors. And so notice, if you are the only donor, there is no benefit to having priority, because you never can give a B unit to yourself, so you're in a priority class, but there's no benefit to that because nobody ever gets a B unit. So the benefit to priority in the way we've parameterized it, which you can't solve analytically maybe you can, but I didn't want to try to do it because there's so many, each round everybody's getting a health shot. So we simulated it, and you see a sort of an increasing function where the more donors there are, the more the priority is worth to you in expectation, but it's concave. So at some point, sort of the 11th donor is not adding that much to your value of priority. So the rebate looks at that profile, tells people exactly how much money they'll earn as a donor in the rebate for each number of other donors, but doesn't, like the priority condition, doesn't tell you how many other people are donating, just says this is what the expected payout is. And so this keeps the disproportionately helping other donors, right? Because as you see that the more people are donating, the more rebates are being given out to all the donors. The rebates are increasing. So that's the thing that it keeps, but it doesn't change the way that organs are allocated, and it doesn't hurt the non-donors. The non-donors earn whatever they would have earned anyway. Right? This is only the benefit to you and to the other donors. So what does that look like? Well, as you may have noticed, it's complicated to explain. So people who have not played the game don't really get it, and it doesn't help them. It doesn't encourage them. But anybody who's played the game over the 15 rounds, who's in this group and gets put into the rebate group, these lines are not statistically significantly different. The rebate essentially replicates the priority rule once people have some experience with the game. Once you see that every so often you actually need a B unit and get it, right, you sort of realize, there is a value to having priority. There are people who are donating, and now I really, I would like to have priority or I should say, I'd like to have the rebate because there are people who are donating. So one natural hypothesis is, okay, there's two things here. One is the incentive to you of being a donor, and the other is the benefit that you're creating, the externality you're creating on other donors. Those are the two things that are still here in the rebate condition. So let's eliminate the second one. Let's have a treatment that all it does is decrease the cost of becoming a donor from 40 cents or 80 cents to, since we're lowering it by 35, to 5 cents or 45 cents, and see what the effect of that is. So what do we see? Well, people get this right away, but it also replicates. So what is our interpretation? Our interpretation is there's nothing magical about the priority rule. But the priority rule is just giving you an incentive to donate that you didn't have before. And we can replicate it with a 35-cent discount, which is basically the average expected benefit of getting priority in the priority condition. But priority is very easy to understand, and it works in round one, significantly. People get that it is a sort of a beneficial thing to have. So I shouldn't say that it might be magical in the sense that it's the highest up here, right? But most people understand that how to play the game and the fact that some people are donors. We basically can replicate it with these other incentives for donation. Yeah.
Sorry. It seems counterintuitive to me that the rebates and the discounts actually do not lead to a higher donation rate compared to just your priority list. It almost seems like the cost that you impose is not really what's driving the decision.
So the benefit, the cash benefit to priority is not, both the discount and the rebate, there is a benefit to priority that is, or a benefit to donating 35 cents or wherever you are on the priority rebate curve. The actual benefit to priority is that some periods you get priority and you get a B unit and you earn $10 extra. There's this very noisy kind of benefit here. But I don't know, we picked the value of the discount and we picked the pricing of the rebate to really match. The simulations took my laptop a long time, or I should say really the core at Harvard, a long time to run because it's, to figure out exactly what the expected incentives are. But we think, I don't know why these rebate and discount would be more effective than priority because the monetary incentive is the same. They'd only be more effective if you thought the priority was had some other maybe effect that was somehow less effective.
I kind of thought that the rebates and the discounts are to mitigate that donation cost that you impose in the control condition. So is it a control? Because there is a cost involved in making that decision. So the discount and the rebate sort of mitigate that. You would think that they actually reduce the barriers towards that, if that is.
Yeah. No, but we think, that's a great point, and we think that the priority is doing the same thing, right? So the way that we think about priority is that priority is providing an incentive to be a donor because you're getting this benefit. You're more likely to get a B unit when you need one, and that's the same. We're doing the same thing with these. We're assigning the B units in the same way as control in the rebate and the discount, and we're giving another monetary incentive to donate to mitigate the cost. Yeah.
It's really cool that the three treatments look so similar in our experience varies. But do you think which of these two groups is most close to reality experience wise?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So I'm going to answer it sort of in a slide. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to sort of push it aside. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say neither of these are possible under current U.S. law, right? So the only three of these treatments that you actually can implement in the world, or we think you can implement under current U.S. law, is the priority treatment, right? Because these involve paying people essentially for organs. But this is not right. So it's very unreasonable. If cats have 9 lives, it's very rare to actually make it to life 16 as a human decision maker. But right, this doesn't have to be, this could just be your experience. You observe the way the world works. You're learning over time about how many people are organ donors. You see people people, friends of friends whose family member needs an organ and whether they get it and how long it takes. You sort of, as you live, you learn sort of whether priority is beneficial to you or whether what the costs are to donating. And so, I think there's an argument to be made for both of these being the sort of realistic. Yeah.
These people are acting as if they're risk neutral.
They are.
Registration is an uncertain benefit.
So if they are not risk neutral, so we often we have debates about this in experiments regularly because the stakes are low, so they probably should be risk neutral over these such small stakes. but in many lab settings, people do not observe, do not display risk neutrality. All right, so if they are risk averse, then maybe we're underestimating the value of the priority rule relative to these other treatments because the priority rule is providing payoffs with a lot of noise. All right, so so that's the sort of main takeaways of the paper. If you want more details, you can read it. But the main result is that priority really works quite well, 200 to 250% higher donation rate than the control condition over the 31 rounds. And when the players are experienced, the decreasing the cost of donation or providing this rebate has a similar effect. And then this was the sort of brush aside to your question. The only thing that we can do outside the lab is priority, at least under current law. And again, I'm going to repeat this a few times. Right, the visceral issues are not captured. I talked to you about kidneys and dying and brains, and they're A units and B units, and one subject over the entire 324 subjects comes to me after and says, "What was this actually about?" And I said, we're modeling organ donation. They're like, "Oh yeah, okay, I see it." But it's not. I don't think this is jumping up at people and they're thinking, A unit, B unit, that must be brain and kidney. Right? There's lots of things. You could be a firm and need an A unit and an A machine and a B machine to earn money, and the same sort of logic might flow. Right, but what is the experiment allowing us to do? As I said before, it's allowing us to look at the architecture of the priority rules, and then we're cautiously extrapolating. Yeah?
In Singapore and Israel, is the priority rule really as strong as the one that you said?
No, so the priority rule, Israel I understand a little bit better. So they assign points, and you get points for in their calculus for being a donor, and you get, in fact, it's more complicated. It is both less severe in terms of it's not all about priority first. It's it adds into a lot of other factors. But if someone in your family was a living donor, or if you were ever a living donor, then you're going to get a lot of priority. If you're a registered donor and you need an organ, you're going to get some slightly less but still significant priority. And if one of your family members is a registered organ donor but you are not, you get some lower level priority.
In the U.S. system, there is a priority if you've been allowed.
If you haven't, yeah. So in the U.S., that's exactly right. If in the U.S., if you were a live donor, you're going to get priority on the if you ever need an organ. But we saw how few people there are who are in that position. Right. Also, I should say, I told you about organ allocation. Children always get priority as well. I mean, there's lots of other tweaks to it. This is sort of the broad strokes. But again, in the lab, we do the sort of extreme thing because we want to see the effect and then understand it. All right, so, yeah.
So, if you go back and look at the shape of your curve, do you find that there's feedback so that if you are in a group where more people are donors, you're more likely to be a donor next time?
So in the paper, there's a big regression table that looks for these kinds of effects. And some of the things that pop out, one is low-cost donors are more likely to donate than high-cost donors. One is that if you received a B unit in the previous round, which is basically the only way you can you're getting positive news about the people's willingness to contribute, then you become more likely to donate in the following round. And similarly, if you earn more money in the previous round, you're more likely to donate in this round. Those often are correlated because when you get a B unit, you then earn more money. But yeah, and I will not spare you the regression table in the second study because we're going to be interested in those specific kinds of responses. All right, so what's the motivation for the second study? So part of the architecture of the priority rules, it involves the question of exactly how they're implemented. In Israel, this sort of all happened over the last few years as this policy was getting proposed and then implemented and debated. It is the case that a donor may revoke consent to donate an organ at any time before removal and shall not bear any civil or criminal liability for such a revocation, even though they're getting priority for saying that they would be a donor if they were in a position to do so. All right, so to explain this a little concretely, here's the donor card in Israel, and I'm translating everything. I'm not translating, somebody translated for me, everything from this red line down to this checkbox. And it's saying that I'm going to donate my organs, and it's either I donate anything or I'm going to indicate which ones I'm comfortable donating. And then this checkbox at the bottom says, as long as a clergyman chosen by my family will approve the donation after my death. So why does this allow the opportunity for a loophole? Well, what was reported in the news in Israel is that this addition of this checkbox was being pushed for by certain groups in Israel that for religious reasons do not feel comfortable allowing their organs to be transplanted in situations when doctors would like to. So in particular, I won't pretend to be an expert on sort of halakhic law, but there's this issue of brain death, which is the kind of death that is most suitable for organ recovery, because as I mentioned earlier, your heart is still beating and your organs might still be perfectly fine, even though you're dead. There is a question as to whether that is considered death among these groups, and so they do not like the idea of having their organs removed in that state. But they are fine with receiving an organ from somebody else when it was removed in that state. Right? So what does that mean? That means that they would like to have priority, but they don't want to ever actually have to be an organ donor, or they don't want to be an organ donor in many of the cases when it would be most useful. Right? So allowing me to say this, that I would like my clergyman to be consulted, right? If I'm in a religious group where the clergyman says this is not a good thing, but then they're not going to allow my organs to be transplanted. So this is one example. This is an example that motivates the design, right? But you could imagine a similar kind of loophole in any system, right? So for example, if in the US you implemented this and you said, we're going to have priority, but we're going to let the next of kin are going to have to say yes to the donation, even for people who registered and consented. Right? I could do the same thing. I could tell my next of kin, I want priority, so I'm going to register. But if they ever ask you, say no, because I don't feel comfortable with it. And that would be a loophole in a system even without this explicit checkbox. All right. So this is a problem that you want to think about more broadly, but it's one that sort of came to the forefront in Israel in implementation. Okay. So we want to know and we want to analyze in the lab how a loophole in the priority system is going to affect donation. So again, this is the second paper. We're going to again do a laboratory experiment. And I invested a lot of time in explaining to you the design of the previous experiment with the A units and the B units and all the periods. And as you may have noticed while I was explaining, it's quite complicated. And we thought, you know what? Let's simplify the game a little. All right, so what's going to happen? You're going to start out with an A unit and two B units. And each lifetime is going to all be revealed in one moment, where you're either going to have A unit failure or B unit failure. So you're either going to be in a position to donate your organs, or you're going to be in a position to need an organ. If you need an organ, if you need a B unit and you get one, you're going to earn an additional $4. So how do you get a B unit? Well, a player with A unit failure has to have agreed to pay the cost to donate their B units. And we intentionally, in this design, had two costs of donation that were very far apart. So we're sort of less interested in the 40-80 cent difference, which was sort of to look at marginal effects. There are people who are low-cost donors and people who are high-cost donors, and we're thinking, the high-cost donor is maybe you do have a really strong feeling for religious reasons or otherwise that you don't want to be a donor. We're going to put a few of those people in the design. So again, how the B units are allocated when they become available is going to vary by treatment. So in the control, we're trying to sort of replicate the first come, first serve in a one period realization. So we're just going to randomize. So of the people who need B units, everyone's going to be equally likely to be at the top of the list, second of the list, third of the list, and so on. And so essentially we're going to randomly assign who gets any available B units. In the priority treatment, we're going to do the same thing with the two classes, and we're going to say if you paid the cost of the donation, you're in the priority group, and any B units available are going to be randomly assigned among people in this group. And then if you didn't agree to donate your B units, then we'll randomly assign any remaining available B units to that group. Again, it is the case that if you are not a donor, then the only way you ever get a B unit is if everybody who had agreed to be a donor has already got one. Finally, we're going to try to model the loophole, and the loophole is going to have the same format as priority, except to get into this priority class that gets given the B units first, you either have to donate or just say, I don't want to donate, but I would like to be in the priority. Right, so this is just a free way to jump into the priority group without actually paying the cost of donation. Right, so it is the sort of extreme version of saying, like, I want priority, but I don't want to donate, so I'm going to check the box, and I know my clergyman will say no if I'm ever in a position, so I don't have to worry that I'm ever going to actually be a donor. All right, so subjects are going to play 30 rounds in a fixed group of 8 subjects. Again, I'm going to have them play 15 rounds in one group, and then in one treatment, and then switch the treatment. So we're going to see everybody in 2 treatments. And every group of 8 is going to have 6 low-cost donors and 2 high-cost donors. And I'm going to tell you in a second what information the subjects have. In some treatments, they're going to know this. In some treatments, they're not. Okay. So what information do they have? So there's 3 different allocation rules, and there's 2 different information treatments. So there's the low information treatment. The low information treatment, subjects are going to know their cost of donation, so they're going to know that it's 50 cents or that it's $4. And then every round, they're going to know whether they had A unit failure or needed a B unit. And when they needed a B unit, they're going to know whether they got one or not. And that's it. Then they're going to decide to be a donor in the following round, and so on. So this looks a lot like the first study that I talked about in terms of information for subjects. In the high information treatment, the subjects are also going to know the cost of the other subject in the group. So this is a one-time thing. I just tell you, in your group, you are one of 6 low-cost donors, and there are 2 high-cost donors with the 50 cents and the $4. And then each round, we're going to tell you how many people donated, how many people didn't donate, and if it's available, how many people took the loophole. So we might expect to see differences in how people respond to the treatments across these low and high information conditions. So just so you can picture it, it's a 3x2 design. So here's the information condition, low and high, and then the organ allocation condition. So either control, priority, or the loophole where they can jump into the priority group. And so what we're going to see is we're going to see subjects either in the low information condition or the high information condition, and we're going to see them 15 rounds in one of these, and then jumping to play 15 rounds in a different one. Yeah?
So does each player know whether the other player signed up for the priority? Like sign up
Only in the high information condition.
They not only know the cost, but they also know.
Yeah, sorry. So they know in the high information, they're learning 2 things. They're learning the costs, and they're learning what people are, whether people are taking the loophole or not taking the loophole. In these treatments, they're only finding out do they donate or not. Okay, let's look first at the low information treatment. All right, so here's my 30 rounds. Again, the jump at 15 because different subjects are here and here. So here's the control group. So again, sort of this decline over time. We're starting out a little higher. Obviously, the game is different. It's also, this is at Wharton. The other game was at Harvard. So a bunch of differences. But you see the same pattern, right? The control group starts out with some level of donation and over time is decreasing. What happens when you introduce priority? Well, we see the same jump in donation that we saw before, starting out higher and staying higher. And in fact, we actually do not see a decline in donation rates over time in the priority conditions in this experiment. So this seems pretty, pretty stable contribution rate. So what happens when we introduce the loophole? We fall immediately back down to the control condition. So you might have had this hypothesis, right? What is the priority doing? It's giving you an incentive to donate because you're getting this higher likelihood of getting an organ or getting a B unit. You can get that incentive by just clicking another box and not paying the cost, and everybody seems to do that. All right, so what are the big results? Priority treatment, like in the first study, is generating more donors than the other treatments, and the loophole treatment is replicating control. How does this look with high information treatments? So again, very similar pattern, different subjects, so these lines are different than the other one, but similar pattern. Again, priority is having this increase, and it's relatively flat. Now loophole, particularly at the beginning of the game, loophole is doing worse than the control condition. So what does this mean? So again, we're replicating priority doing better. The fact that loophole is doing worse than control treatment, it means that people who would have donated out of the goodness of their heart in the control condition are withholding that donation because of the existence of the loophole. So this is aggregating all the data and sort of comparing. So I showed you in the high information treatment that the difference is significant in terms of control versus loophole. If you pull all the data together, it's also significant. Right? But just to give you a sense of the magnitudes, across all the 30 rounds, big effective priority, and loophole, it's small but significant at 5% decrease in contribution rates. But the gains to priority are quite large. So if you could eliminate this loophole, you'd be in good shape. But if you have the loophole, you're actually doing worse than no priority at all. So the first, yeah.
At the beginning of the round, do I know the contributions of people for this round, or do I know from the prior round?
Sorry, you're learning, in each round you learn what happened last round. So you find out, oh, I needed to be unit and I got it. And then you learn, oh,
But you don't learn that this many people donated.
You learn that, you do learn that 5 people donated, 2 of those people had a unit failure, that 4 units became available, and they were in the other 3 were in the priority group, they all got B units. You were not in the priority group, you didn't get a B unit, you learn all that in the high information condition. All right, so what is this? You could have guessed this from the first graph. This is again looking at all 30 rounds across the loophole treatments, high and low information. And you can just see that green is took the loophole, blue is donated, and red is said, I'm not donating and I don't want the loophole. Right? And there's very low rates of this. There's a bigger mass here, but there's few people who have the cost of $4, that this is just a few people driving this. Right? For the most part, everybody takes the loophole who isn't donating. So why is it the case? This question of that these people they would have donated if there was no priority rule, but now you have a priority rule and a loophole, and they're withholding donation. So why is this? And so I'd like to argue that it's because they observe people taking advantage of the loophole. And I'll go further and say it's because there's evidence in the data that it's the low-cost guys who probably can forgive high-cost guys taking the loophole, but can't forgive other low-cost guys for taking the loophole. So how am I going to show you that? I'm going to show you this big regression table. I don't want you to look at everything. I just want you to look at the top 2 rows for a second. So this is the probability that you donate in the loophole condition. And what is how is that affected by the number of other people in the group who took the loophole? So the first line of coefficients is looking in the low information condition. So these are all not significant because you don't know how many people are taking the loophole in this environment. I should say there's fixed effects in here and round dummies. So I'm soaking up a lot of that variation. I'm also controlling for whether you get a B unit. So in the low information condition, I'm basically taking out all of the information that you get, which is when you need a B unit, do you get it? I'm taking that all out with these controls. So what I'm able to do then is do an interaction with info, which is for the high information condition, and say, what's the effect of seeing other people take the loophole when you know how many there are, and it's between 3.5% and 4% less likely to donate for each additional person in your group that took the loophole in the previous round. And to give you a sense, looking at all 30 rounds, looking at all the subjects, it is about it's 3.4%, and you get about 3.2% increase in donation when you get a B unit. Right, so this is about the order of magnitude. Seeing one additional person take the loophole, it decreases your contribution by about as much as getting a B unit when you need one. Getting a B unit in this game increases your likelihood of contributing the following round. So that's this comparison. Then I said that I would like to argue that it's the low-cost guys seeing other low-cost guys take the loophole. So how do I do that? So now I'm focusing on cost equals 50, the low-cost guys. And I look at these interactions of the number of other people who took the loophole interacted with info. And the thing to particularly look at is the jump in this interaction between two other people taking the loophole, two people in your group taking the loophole, and 3 people taking the group in the loophole. And it's much clearer in the first 15 rounds, second 15 rounds. Let's say there's less of a case for it. But here we see this is significantly different. The negative 3.7% is significantly different than the 15.9%. So the third person taking the third addition person, so you don't know, by the way, the cost of the people who take the loophole. You just see that there are 3 people who take the loophole, right? But you know that 2 of the people in your group have these high costs. And you know it's not you because you have a low cost. Right? So as soon as you see 3 people taking the loophole, you know with certainty that at least one low cost guy took the loophole. And it looks like that's where we're seeing a big jump. And I want to point out, it's not because this is not significant and this is significant. It's because the magnitude difference is so large and the rest of the magnitude differences, as you add another loophole taker, are small. All right, so I want to spend the last 5 minutes, is that right? Talking about the third study, so I don't have to belabor these conclusions of this study, but just that how you implement the priority rule matters a lot, and the loophole can actually do a lot of damage. Okay, and I guess one corollary, at least for Israel, they have a loophole. Right? You might not want to broadcast how many, you might want to try to stay in the low cost, the low information environment and not be in the high information environment. So if it turns out that a bunch of people end up revoking their donation when they end up eligible to be a donor, you might not want to try to shame them by broadcasting that around because that might decrease contributions from people who would still contribute. Okay. So as I've said many times, right, there are visceral issues that are not being captured by the lab studies. We're trying to understand the architecture of these priority rules, but we might be interested, and we are interested in seeing what happens when you're looking at real organ donation decisions. So that's this third study. This is one that I haven't presented before, but it's quite simple, so I'll describe it to you quickly. And so subjects recruited to the laboratory for an experiment. They're told they need a Massachusetts ID, so it's a learner's permit, a driver's license, or a state ID card. They're told they need the last 4 digits of their social security number, but they're not told that this has anything to do with organ donation. So it just said it's weird restrictions for this study. I don't think people really internalize this. I get a lot of people coming without mass IDs saying, I want to participate. It's like, no, you need a mass ID. It's not up to me. Because what they're going to do is they're going to log into the Massachusetts Organ and Tissue Donor Registry. So when they arrive to the lab, I read a paragraph from the consent form. They read it to themselves, but I want to emphasize it, so I read it to them about what they're going to do. They're going to go log into this registry. They're going to have the opportunity to change their organ and tissue donor registration status, and then they're going to take a survey. So if they were to just go directly to the website, they would see an enrollment form that looks like this. Actually, the form, if you went, you would see this. The form has changed. It was less pretty in 2010 when we started the study. But this is what the form looks like today if you go to the DMV. But they don't see this form because we built in the laboratory, we built a plugin for the web browser so that we could control the way in which they were asked the question, and we could record information like whether or not they're currently a donor. So what they see is they see a blank, sort of a clean interface that doesn't point out that this is Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles, and talk about registration and other things that might start to get you in the mindset of car accidents and sort of other things that might come into play. We just want a clean interface, and again, as I said, we want to be able to see whether they're currently a donor or not. So what are we going to do once they log in? Well, first we want to just see whether people change their status when given the opportunity, and then we're going to look at whether people opt in, whether the way in which you ask the question affects the likelihood of donating. And we're particularly interested in opt-in versus mandated choice, and I'll describe what that is now. In opt-in, there's a checkbox that says, I'd like to join the registry, and I check it to become a donor. In a mandated choice, there's options. Yes, I want to join the registry, or something equivalent to no, I don't want to join the registry, or no, not at this time, or I don't want to become a donor right now, whatever. Right, so in a mandated choice frame, you have to say yes or no. In an opt-in frame, you can just continue without clicking anything, and it'll keep you as a non-donor. Why is this something that we're interested in? Well, the United Kingdom and a number of US states have recently switched to or are planning to switch to the mandated choice frame. So we want to sort of look at whether we're going to see the effects that they see, or whether that they anticipate with this switch. So they're going to see after they log in, we're going to see whether they're currently a donor or not, and then we're going to request that they become a donor. And we're either going to do it with an opt-in choice or opt-in frame or a mandated choice frame. And then we're also going to either show them a list of organs that they're going to donate or not. So this is, if you were to log in and you were not a donor, then you would see this screen. Your current organ and tissue donor status is no, I'm not a donor. Then your options are yes, I want to change, or please do not change. It's a very sort of, it's well designed for what they want to do, but not for what we want to do. So what they see in our treatments, this is one of them. Basic information about becoming an organ donor, and this is the opt-in frame. If you continue without checking the box, you will not be registered. This is what you see if you're currently not a donor. And you can check to join the registry. In the mandated choice frame, you are asked to select between the following two options. I want to register, I do not want to register. And then when we add the list, it's the same opt-in or mandated choice frame, but with a list of organs that might be donated. So 42% of our subjects who come in are currently donors, very close to the mass average, which was around that when we started and a little bit higher when we ended the study. Everybody else is not a donor, but everybody else has been asked at some point. So in Massachusetts, if you get an ID card of any of the kinds that we require for you to come to the study and participate, you will have been asked this question. So what is the probability that you are registered at the end of the study based on whether you're a donor or non-donor and the treatment? So the first thing is, if you're currently a donor, you stay a donor. So we had, out of the 156 people who were currently donors, all but 2 remain donors in the study. And so there's no difference the way in which they're asked. What about the initial non-donors? So let's look first at opt-in. So a substantial portion of people who are not donors when they come into the lab, even though they were asked at some previous point when they got their license or state ID or whatever, they say yes and they add themselves to the registry in our study. And then we're going to compare this to mandated choice, and we should expect to see it go up. This is what these policies are advocating for, but it doesn't. It's directionally less, and in some specifications, slightly, marginally statistically significantly less effective than the opt-in. So there's 2 results, and they both inform the 2 big results. They both inform the title of the paper, which is "Don't Take No for an Answer." The first "Don't Take No for an Answer" is 29% of the non-donors are joining the registry, but only 1% of the current donors are removing themselves. All right, so one way to think about this is if you say you want to be a donor, it's pretty stable in terms of preferences. But if you say no, you can be convinced just by being asked again, to become a donor, so implies we should ask more often. Don't take no for an answer. The second don't take no for an answer is that the mandated choice is not outperforming opt-in. We can reject, in fact, at least at marginal significance, that it's not improving the registration rates. And I could talk about why this differs from previous work. I think it has something to do with the fact that everybody in our study is actually reading the question. Whereas mandated choice works really well on people who are not paying any attention. You're forcing them to pay attention. But that could be the real difference. Follow-up work will investigate that. But it's different. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with, because we're over time, is this idea, bringing in this next of kin. So nothing that I've talked about so far involved next of kin at all. But next of kin might matter a lot, particularly if they know how you were asked and whether you ended up on the registry or not. Okay, so I will very simply describe what we did on MTARC. This is the last result. We asked people to look at our screens from this study and to imagine that somebody had died and that the next of kin had to decide whether to donate their organs. And all they knew is whether they saw, if they saw this screen, all they knew is, okay, they saw the screen and the person checked the box and became registered, or left the box blank and was not registered. That's all they know. And the subjects are asked, what should the next of kin do? Should the next of kin donate the organs or not? Right? So they're asked that either for the opt-in or for the mandated choice without the list. We want to keep it simple. And the question is, what is the likelihood that people will say, yes, the next of kin should donate the organs? And if you're already registered, then, so this is, they were asked for all four of these combinations of frame and yes, no. And so we can look at just the first choice, which is between subjects, or all four choices, which is within and between. And so this is just the first choice. If they're already registered, then there's no difference between whether they're registered because they checked the box yes on the opt-in, or because they said yes rather than no in the mandated choice. But there is a difference among the people who are unregistered about whether you say yes, I want to register them, and it is more likely that you are going to say the next of kin should donate the organ if the person is not registered because they didn't check the box, rather than because they said the box that was a no in the mandated choice. Right? So, and this is, if anything, it's stronger when you combine with an in between. So, how do we want to interpret this? We have to be careful how we ask, because it may, in fact, have consequences on the next of kin when the next of kin are thinking about whether to override the wishes of a donor, or not override the wishes, I should say, try to infer something about the wishes of a potential donor. And they might think that not checking yes on an opt-in might convey different information than selecting whatever the no option is on the mandated choice. Now, ours is a little bit unfair because our options are, I want to join the registry and I do not want to join the registry. And the way that they're implemented in practice is, I want to join the registry and no, not at this time. So it's possible that if you're the next of kin, you might say, well, not at this time. Maybe that actually is like not checking the opt-in, right? But you know that they had a choice to say yes or no. They had to pick something, and they said the negative, not the positive. And that might lead you to be reluctant to register. So I'm definitely over time. Are there any sort of concluding questions from the web or in person?
We have the room until 6, about 5:34 right now, but if you don't have questions, feel free.
And I'll flash to the.
I have a quick question. And one other option presumably is to have a question that says to opt out, right? And why did you not try the opt out?
So opt out. So this is heavily discussed and debated. So for those who don't know, there is literature sort of looking at across countries. Some countries have an opt out rule where you are presumed. It's called presumed consent. You're presumed to be a donor unless you remove yourself from the registry, and that is and the countries that have opt out have very high rates of organ donor registration. So there's two answers to that. One is that's not the whole story. So among the countries in the world, in terms of number of organs recovered, per capita, U.S. is second, and we above many countries that have opt-out policies, and we have opt-out. So it's not that we are no, it's not that that would solve all the problems. The other thing is in the U.S. And many states have thought about trying to do something that looks like opt-out. In the U.S., the way that organ donation law is written, it's under the gift law. It's an anatomical gift, and that requires a positive statement that you want to become a donor. And so it is not enough to just say, I'm not. They didn't opt out, so we're going to impose. We're going to take their organs. If it was under salvage law rather than gift law, you might be able to do that.
But it'd still be interesting to know what the response would be.
Yeah, but it's hard for us to actually implement that. Like the IRB was comfortable with what we did, but probably would not be comfortable with if somebody's not paying attention to the study, they leave the lab as a donor. Right? That's something that we're hesitant.
That's a question of state law. And many states have opt-out for corneas.
Yes.
So
it's not implausible that we could, right, in Florida, they can take your corneas, they don't even have to tell you. So that isn't, my guess is that the Oregon, beyond corneas, it might become a federal issue because of the way that the politics of organ donation and transplant work. But yeah, it is something that people are interested in and think about. And it's complicated because it may also bring in other issues like what the norm is for society. Right? A lot of the studies that do this hypothetically find big effects of an opt-out frame, but they also combine that with, in this society, everybody is a donor unless you decide not to be, and there's a message in that. So it would be nice to get that message potentially under the current legislation because it's hard to change legislation, but maybe it's easier to change messaging. Yeah.
In the second paper, when you were describing the low and high information groups, I incorrectly assumed that these players who are like facing each other were going to be able to point at a player and say that specific player. Oh, so that is the case?
No. So the thing that I was nodding at is they're not facing each other, right? So it's all anonymous through the computer. And they do not know, they only know the number, they only know the distribution of costs and and how many people donated or took them.
So when I thought that's what you were doing, I was excited because I thought, oh, he's going to be capturing this peer effects with pressure. Did you ever think about doing that, or how do you?
So we a little bit the fact that B units become available is an indication that somebody donated might motivate you to donate yourself. So that we think we do see. We think we also see, knowing people take the loophole makes you less likely to donate, and so that's another effect that we see. When we thought about introducing information, we were trying to think of what are the paths that Israel could take given the existence of the loophole, and we were thinking, well, okay, one is just don't publicize information about what happens. Like don't constantly tell people that there are people taking the loophole or not taking the loophole, versus telling people that reporting that people were taking the loophole. And then it was a question of should we, it seemed like maybe too much information to give the cost of every person along with their decision, because in real life you don't really know the cost. We're just guessing that if you're from a religious group that has particular beliefs, that maybe the costs are higher, but maybe they're not higher. Maybe you just, you just don't want to do it, and you don't feel an intense religious reason. You just feel whatever, it feels icky, and you don't want to do it. Right? So we didn't want to presume knowing the costs. We just wanted to give them information, which they might get in practice about the choice of these different options.
Is this the same group that doesn't serve in the
Can't say that with certainty, but
It's a relatively small group, and it may not be as big of a problem, right? People say, well, we can expect 10% of the population, 5% of the population to do this.
Right. So the issue, right. So the question is, how feasible is the loophole for people who are low cost but don't want to donate? So, right, in our study, it's not just the high cost people who are taking the loophole. Everybody takes the loophole who doesn't donate. or almost everybody. So, now the question
But
is,
you do have a cost, and there are many people would argue that a lot of registrations are by people who get a positive benefit.
oh, absolutely. So in the first paper, I spared this. I spared you guys this. In the first paper, we have a model of people's decision to become an organ donor, and we presume that the costs are either positive or negative. Right? You might feel really good about donating, and you might donate no matter what the policy is. And so when we impose costs in the lab, we're sort of recognizing that, in fact, many people, just out of the goodness of their heart, like the idea of helping other people. And so even without any incentive, they donate. They're people for whom the, call it warm glow in the paper, they're the people for whom the warm glow outweighs the 40 cent or the 50 cent cost. So, it's not that we're presuming those people don't exist. In fact, those are the people, we think, who donate in the rounds without any incentive. Yeah?
So you said that since the change in Israel, that you have some data, or?
So I'm excited. This time next week, I'll be with the guys from Israel who have the raw data we can look at. They did publish a paper that when the law was being introduced, they saw a spike in the number of donations in that year. And so that was the first indication at all was positive, that this was already working. The numbers are very small. So the number of live donations that happen or the number of recovered organs in Israel in a given year is much smaller than the US. There's not that many. And so when they look, the early data from 2012 doesn't show the same positive bump. So maybe it was an anomaly, but it's one of these things that it's still too soon to tell. But what you should expect to see, and what I'm going to look for in the data, is spikes in registration rate, particularly leading up to April 1st of 2012. Because the way that they got around one loophole, so I don't want to be mean to the Israeli legislation because they're working under a lot of constraints, but they were cognizant of and worried about people who might get sick, need an organ, sign the donor card, and then say, "Oh, I need to be a donor. I need to be a recipient, but I am a donor, so I want the priority." So the way that they implemented the policy was anybody who was registered before April 1st, you are going to have priority, and you're going to be in the priority group. But after April 1st, if it's not the time when you're 18 deciding for the first time, then you need to wait 3 years before you get priority. Okay, so you can't, and that 3 years is a long time, so you'd rather get on the waiting list now rather than wait 3 years and try to get on the waiting list with priority. So I'm interested to see what the effect is sort of leading up to that April 1st deadline. You should see a bunch of people, if they're informed about it, flooding to register to take advantage of the incentive.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.